Chimney sweeps, the world over, have found all sorts of things lodged inside the flue when they've come to clean them. Often animals and the skeletons of are found. Cats, for example, have often been found, and birds, of course. Sometimes secret things have been hidden there, money in pouches or tins or even in bottles. But a baby lodged on a ledge in the flue is unusual but not unprecedented. Infant mortality a few hundred years ago was a big problem. Infanticide as well. Many people were so poor that the advent of a baby, another mouth to feed, was too much, and these small creatures, these humans, had to be got rid of, and were, without a police force to look for them or account for them. It was relatively easy. So babies would be deposited, as horrible as it sounds, shoved into a hedge somewhere or dropped into a ditch, and even shoved up a chimney flue. Jack Dawley was a chimney sweep, and he was waiting for the trial for the murder of his own newborn baby. Sadly for him, it wasn't going to go well, which is a shame because he was innocent of the crime. The baby itself was a total surprise to him, but not to his wife. You see, because they were a poor family, she knew that he would be extremely angry and upset with the advent of a baby. And so as soon as she realized that she was pregnant, she kept it secret. She dressed in a way that he wouldn't know. And fortunately for her, that at the end of the term, the baby was born while he was away at work. He worked, as I say, as a chimney sweep at a large estate for a justice of the peace and a member of parliament. He had a number of buildings in the county, and that required quite a lot of Jack's time. He also had other duties, such as the gardening work. But he wasn't an easy man to get on with, and he very often argued with the staff. And there was also the case of occasional mini thefts, petty thefts we would call it, where a little bit of food might have been stolen, or even some poaching. This came to a head one day when the Justice of the Peace, his boss, his landlord, the lord of the manor, sacked him, dismissed him, no longer required his services after a blazing row with a member of the staff which he had witnessed the lord of the manor through a window. Now, unfortunately for Jack Dawley, this also meant that he had to be evicted from the cottage, for the cottage was tied to the estate. And the landlord was quite severe and gave him 24 hours until the next morning to clear his stuff and be gone. So that day when he came home and discovered his wife holding a baby in her arms had sent him over the edge. He was catatonic, he was angry, and he screamed, "You will have to be rid of that creature. Get rid of her." Whereupon he stormed out up to the tavern down the lane, and there he got blind drunk. He couldn't remember how he got home the following morning, but he remembered waking up with a sore head and then gathering his bits, ignoring his wife's protestations, gathering the stuff together, loading it up on a handcart, for they had not that much, and wheeling it to the workhouse. His landlord, although tough and severe, as I mentioned, had actually arranged for them to stay in a room annexed to the workhouse for 5 days. It would give them time to find somewhere else to live and get other employment. However, they hadn't been there for very long. They'd literally just got there and unpacked their stuff when there was a knock on the door. When Jack opened the door, 2 burly constables were standing there, demanding that he go with them. Having no choice, he followed and was taken back to the magistrate's house where he used to work. and there in front of the magistrate he was told that he was now under arrest for the murder of his own daughter. He pleaded his innocence, as naturally he would. But he was told the evidence was too strong against him and he would go to trial. The evidence came from people in the tavern who said that in his drunkenness he had explained that his wife had had this baby and that he had no money to feed it and that he would destroy it. But worse than that, Jack was led to a separate room, and there, lying in a small cot, was the remains of the newborn baby. It had been found in his own chimney by the constables earlier that day. As the rumours had got round to them, the first place they looked was up the chimney, him being a chimney sweep. And so he went to trial, where he was tried and then convicted, and 6 days later he was hanged in the market town to huge crowds and big cheers. Well, spin forward about 20 years, and there's a boat, a ship, leaving Liverpool. And on that ship is an author of crime stories. He's going to America to try and find some more stories, but he's always talking to people, trying to pick up tidbits. And there's a woman, a retired cook, who is away and has been saving for a new life abroad. And they're sitting together on the deck chairs on the deck, and he's explaining what he does. And she says to him, "I've got a story that nobody knows. You can publish this if you like, for I will be in a different country and none of this will matter." And he encourages her to tell this story. It is the story of her husband, she says, who was a chimney sweep, who worked for a very important MP. But unfortunately, he was an argumentative man and he was dismissed. Before he was dismissed, they were extremely poor, and she had had a baby, and she'd kept it secret from him, knowing that he would be very angry, for they couldn't afford another mouth. And while he was at work, she'd had this baby. But sadly, the baby was already dead when it was born, what we call now a stillbirth. Knowing that the anger would mount when she saw it for the deception that she had caused, she decided that she would hide the baby in the chimney and then dispose of it later. No sooner has she hidden the baby when there was a knock at the door, and her neighbour, in a terrible state, came in with her 2-month-old baby and said to her, "Please, can you look after my baby? I have to nip into town. I have some urgent business and I cannot take my little baby with me. Will you just mind her?" "Of course," the woman said. "Of course I will look after your baby." An hour later, the husband returned. Jack Dawley came bouncing in with the bad news that they were evicted and that they were now penniless, saw the baby and realised that she had been deceiving him all this time. "I knew you were pregnant," he said. "You thought you could deceive me, but you couldn't. I know you too well. You were wearing larger garments. You thought I didn't know. I've kept it quiet. You must get rid of it. Destroy this thing." And then he'd gone to the pub, whereupon, of course, he'd got blind drunk and blurted out that she had had the baby and that he was going to destroy it. They couldn't keep it. But it wasn't his baby. It was a fascinating story, and the author had made many notes. But then he looked puzzled, and he turned to the woman and said, "But I don't understand. If he was your husband and he was innocent, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you plead for him, plead his case?" And she turned to the author and said, "He was a violent man, my husband, and he beat me many times. And during the 9 months that I was pregnant, he beat me in the stomach, and I think that he had already murdered the child."